Stuttgart unter Turkheim. This is where the motor vehicle set out on its victorious worldwide campaign. 100 years of automotive history are stored and documented here under the three-pointed star in the Mercedes-Benz Museum. Thousands of visitors from all over the world come here to experience automotive history at first hand. An intelligent communication system provides visitors with the information they require in whichever part of the museum they happen to be. Our journey begins. Here we see the world's first motor vehicle. Gottlieb Daimler, true to his maxim of putting engines to use wherever appropriate, installed an engine in this two-wheeler in 1885. In this very workshop, which, like Daimler's birthplace in Schorndorf and the residence of Karl Benz in Ladenburg, are still open to the public today. The busts of Gottlieb Daimler and Karl Benz can be seen in the museum. Benz never lost sight of his objective of constructing a motor vehicle, and so we find his patent motor car from 1886 alongside Daimler's horseless motor carriage. In 1893, Benz devised the axle pivot steering system, a significant improvement for subsequent automotive design. Motorized carriages soon became a common sight on the roads. The coachmen became chauffeurs, and the horseless carriages were now cars. Moving pictures had also been invented by this time. The film documentation from that era can be viewed in the museum today. And here it is, the first Mercedes, named after the daughter of the Austrian consul, Emil Jelinek. He'd ordered an entire year's production from Daimler, 36 cars in all. These superb vehicles were designed by Wilhelm Maybach. The Mercedes Simplex. Karl Benz countered with his Parsifal. Styling was all the rage. The vehicles are a testimony to an exciting era. Amundsen's conquest of the South Pole, the sinking of the unsinkable Titanic. Caruso achieved lasting fame. And it wasn't just Josephine Baker who drove men round the bend. Cars had a similar effect. Culmination was the 140 horsepower Mercedes 630, the aesthetic ideal of its era. Daimler's star and Benz's laurel wreath were united in 1926, from which time cars were produced under the name of Mercedes-Benz. At the outset of the 30s, things were looking up and cars were increasing in size. The largest of all was his, in marine grey, with his own coat of arms in place of the star. Although living in exile, he remained active. Kaiser Wilhelm II. Just as on board a ship, he had full command of his car and could dispatch his orders to the helmsman by means of a signalling system. So could Japanese Emperor Hirohito. This car was in His Majesty's service until 1970. Mercedes were owned and driven by emperors, kings, aristocrats, politicians, film stars and poets. They wouldn't settle for anything less. And in many films, Mercedes cars played more than a mere supporting role. Everyone's dream car, the Mercedes 500K Special Convertible. 26,000 Reichsmarks, 100 months' wages for the man in the street. This one was a little more affordable. The Mercedes-Benz 260D, made in 1936. The first car to be fitted with a diesel engine. It was everywhere to be seen as a taxi. The culmination of 8-cylinder automotive engineering, the 770. The 170V. More of these were built prior to the war than any other Mercedes-Benz vehicle, and it was the last. The Unterturkheim plant in 1945, at the site where the museum now stands. But things soon picked up again where they left off before the war. Production of the 170 was resumed. There were now petrol-driven and diesel models. This is what the 170 looked like until the mid-50s. The 50s. The economic miracle was fully underway. Both rock and roll and food were in plentiful supply, and Germany won the World Cup for the first time. The Germans had acquired a sense of achievement once more. 1951 saw the appearance of the new Mercedes-Benz showpiece, the 300. The nostalgia surrounding a car and many of its owners. Federal Chancellor Konrad Adenauer was one of them. The 300 soon acquired a more sporty flair, and the 300 SL has lost nothing of its fascination today. Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, Gary Cooper, Gregory Peck, Sophia Loren, Gina Lollobrigida, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Herbert von Karajan, Pablo Picasso. One could go on and on. For a change, they were fans themselves, fans and proud owners of this extraordinary sports car. At the outset of the 60s, everything was a little larger. So it was only a matter of time before the Mercedes-Benz 600 appeared. Federal Chancellor Ludwig Erhard used this car as a state limousine, as did Charles de Gaulle, Leonid Brezhnev, John F. Kennedy and Queen Elizabeth. Others are still doing so today. Pope Paul VI was chauffeured in this one. A landaulet with a comfortable elevated seat, it could be opened up like a convertible. True to Daimler's maxim of putting engines to use on land, on water and in the air, Daimler-Benz engines were installed at an early stage in almost everything that flew. To the present day, many a Daimler-Benz engine has taken to the air. inevitably they've taken to the water as well. But let's now return to the car. The Mercedes-Benz Museum can lay claim to more than just being the only one in the world in a position to look back on 100 years of automotive history. It's also unique in its complete documentation of a century of motor racing history. It all started in 1899 with the Phoenix racing car, and thus began an unparalleled series of victories. In 1911, the Lightning Benz attained a speed of 228 kilometers per hour, a record which stood for 8 years. Racing history, bumper to bumper. On the eve of the Eiffel race in 1934, the white W25 was suffering from overweight. The paintwork had to be removed overnight, exposing the gleaming silvery body shell. The Silver Arrow era had begun. By 1939, Mercedes-Benz had already claimed 28 Grand Prix victories. Von Brauchitsch, Caracciola and Lang were the heroes of their day. This success story, interrupted by the war, was continued in 1952. Carl Kling won the Carrera Panamericana in his 300 SL. Mercedes-Benz chalked up a double victory at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. In 1953 and 1954, the honours went to Manuel Fangio. Then there was the unforgettable quadruple victory at Aintree by Fangio, Moss, Kling and Taruffi. A cabinet full of trophies and cups is testimony to these momentous achievements. In 1989, the tradition of the Silver Arrows was revived with the C9. After an absence of 34 years from the racing circuits, Mercedes-Benz has now become world champion once more. Many insights gained from racing experience have found their way into standard production, and we can therefore conclude our tour with the vehicles that can be seen every day on the roads and with which we're all familiar. The Mercedes-Benz Museum is evidence that automotive history lives on. With its review of the history of the automobile, the great adventure of our century, the Mercedes-Benz Museum inspires us to think ahead to what is to come.